Back when I was little, every time my grandfather saw me and my brothers pick on some new kid in the neighborhood, he'd whisk us away into the living room to once again tell us the story of Devin. Grandpa was old, like really, really old. The story always started with him in his late teens back in I don't know, 1917 or something like that. He lived in France with his parents at the time, and he always explained to us how simple everything was back then. And then he'd take in a breath and detail the arrival of the Gervain family. The Gervains were a noble family from England. The two parents had immigrated to France with their little boy Devin. Devin was thought to be some kind of child prodigy, but by the way Grandpa described him, it sounded more like he just had autism. By Grandpa's description, he was a little 10-year-old boy with light blonde hair and pink cheeks, and he had some of the biggest blue eyes you'd ever seen, and his lips were always positioned in such a way that it looked like they were always quivering. Devin was also very ill, apparently. He had some kind of kidney malfunction that kept his stomach from working properly. He was always vomiting out of nowhere, and his mother would often order him to take nature walks in an attempt to steady his health. In character, Devin was this really creepy kid, apparently. He was pretty religious, a little too religious, actually, and he was always talking to himself and whispering things to angels. He was also really weird, so he didn't have that many friends. Grandpa and his friends hated Devin Gervain. In fact, most people did. Back then, the French and the English didn't get along very well. Every time Devin took his little walks, Grandpa and his friends would hide in the bushes at the edge of St. Marguerite Bridge. When Devin had crossed the bridge, they'd jump out and grab him. They'd swing his little body over the side of the bridge and punch him in the back until he threw up. Then they'd just leave him there, with nothing to do but continue his walk. Devin never tried to fight them, nor did he try to avoid the bridge that he was always getting mugged at. He just accepted it. One day, Devin was walking toward St. Marguerite Bridge like always, and of course, Grandpa and his friends jumped out at him. However, this time Devin started screaming and wailing like a madman. He started talking all this weird stuff about angels and prayers and stuff, but Grandpa and his friends paid no attention to it. They threw his body over the side of the bridge and punched him over and over again. Devin gagged and sputtered for a second, and then there was blood. He began to vomit blood. Grandpa and his friends were pretty surprised by this, and they actually dropped him. Devin fell 26 feet into the river below and hit his head on a rock. Grandpa and his friends started panicking, and so, out of fear, they took Devin's body and dragged it to a little prairie in the middle of the woods. There was some kind of graveyard there, but it wasn't very big. They dug up an old grave and opened up a coffin, and then they removed the skeleton that already resided there and threw Devin's body in instead. As the weeks went by, the people in the little French town started to notice Devin's absence. Their Gervain family fell into despair, and a few townspeople even started searches. But only a few. Like I said, the French and English weren't very good pals back then, so the Devon affair wasn't that big of a tragedy. Grandpa and his friends, though, got more and more nervous by the week. They were so afraid of getting caught, and their parents even had to pull them out of school because they were too distracted in class. Private home studies helped a bit, but not much. It was 2 weeks after Devon disappeared, and the town was shocked by the news that Grandpa's friend Philip had disappeared as well. The town searched in vain for Philip, and he was actually very well liked in the community, but they never found him. He slowly faded into the background. Just as his appearance started to become ancient history, his body was found. An old woman who lived by a cemetery in the center of town had been hearing some strange noises from within one of the tombs. The police waited a day to obtain permission to open up the crypt. When the police looked inside, they saw a small wooden coffin in the center of the room, and when they opened it up, Philip was found inside of it. At first, it was assumed that he was just murdered and then placed inside. However, scratch marks on the inside of the coffin proved that he had been buried alive. 2 days after Philip was found, another one of Grandpa's friends, Gustavo, also disappeared. He was found 6 days later in another graveyard, also buried alive. Emilio, Richard, David, they all disappeared and reappeared in the exact same way, buried alive. Grandpa was the only one left. He lived his days in so much fear that he couldn't even dress himself properly. Late at night, he wouldn't sleep. He'd just wait for fate to take him as well. Every little noise in the night made him jump, and everything he did just reminded him more of Devon. Finally, he came to the conclusion that there was something he had to do. Grandpa took a shovel from his father's workroom and headed out into the forest. After 6 miles of trees and bushes, he finally came to Devon's grave. He worked 2 hours to dig up the old coffin, and when he opened it, he found Devon. Now, the next part of the story never made sense to my brothers and I, and to this day it still doesn't. It didn't make sense because when Grandpa found Devin, he was still alive. Devin looked up at my grandpa and then just began coughing and dragged his limp little body out of the box. He sat down in the grass with big eyes glaring at my grandfather. Of course, Grandpa was afraid. He felt like he'd gone insane, but he pushed all of his feelings aside and took little Devin into his arms and carried him back to the Gervain house. His family was overjoyed that their son had been found, and Devin never told anyone what had happened to him. Devin died 6 days later due to the severity of his disease. Grandpa never gave an epilogue to his story, he just left it with that ending. It used to be a chilling bedtime story when I was young, but as I grew up, it turned into what seemed like a fable, a little fairy tale designed to scare me away from bullying. One day when I was 15, Grandpa just disappeared. He just vanished one night, leaving no note or anything. The family was a wreck. My sister, who was visiting France at the time, called me saying she was going to visit Grandpa's old hometown. The next day, we received word from France. My grandfather had been buried alive in a small graveyard in the middle of a wooded area in France. To this day, we have no idea how this happened. Thanks again for listening. This is Devin. Link will be in the description. Again, author is anonymous, and I'll continue to try and crank these out. I'm looking for 3 to 4 a week, but my schedule's been a little bit crazy, so sorry it's haphazard. But thanks you guys so much. Hopefully you like this video, and there will be more to come. Have a great day.